Hey, you guys, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and welcome to my Christmas edition of my Flickers of Fear movie review show, where I'm actually doing a Christmas movie today. This is actually going to go up on Christmas Day or Christmas Eve if you're a patron. And this movie, this was like a pretty, well, like a no-brainer for one that I wanted to go up on Christmas Day, because this is actually a Christmas movie in the sense that, you know, it's set on Christmas Eve, someone that's going to a Christmas party, and it's also one that doesn't really get talked about all that much, and I kind of feel like it's something of an underrated gem. I actually hadn't heard of it until fairly recently. I was going through one of my beloved horror lists, like I go to different blogs and stuff and look for recommendations for stuff that I might have missed out on, and this was one that came up on a lot of people's underrated Christmas horror movie lists and stuff like that. And so I think that I sat down and watched it probably like 2 years ago, and I thought it was great, and I was just like, oh my god, why doesn't hardly anybody bring this movie up? It doesn't really get talked about a lot, even among Christmas horror movies. It has started to kind of filter into some lists more recently, but yeah, this is a great movie, and it's called Dead End, and it's from 2003. Don't confuse it, because I know there's a bunch of other movies called Dead End. I think even one of the Wrong Turn movies is called something like Wrong Turn whatever, Dead End or whatever. It's not that one. This is the one from 2003, which has Ray Wise and Lynn Shaye in it, so if that doesn't make you want to watch it, I don't know what does, because I love those two. You know, I mean, obviously Ray Wise had done, Twin Peaks and stuff like that at this point, but I think this was prior to Lynn Shaye becoming kind of more of a horror icon because of all the, Insidious movies and all that kind of stuff. So, and she's actually fantastic in this. This is a pretty low budget film, and it's actually French, even though all the actors in it, as far as I know, are American or Canadian. And but the directors of it are French. It was actually written and directed by Jean-Baptiste Andrea and Fabrice Canepa. And I don't remember what else they had done. I don't think Fabrice Canepa has done. I think she's only done like a couple more films. So I think Jean-Baptiste Andrea has done some more stuff, and I believe he's a novelist as well. But this movie, this is one of those things that I love coming across movies like this. And by the way, if you want to watch it, it's on Tubi right now for free, at least as of, Christmas 2021. So definitely go check it out. It's really worth a watch. I almost want to say it's like a horror comedy, but it's like a dark comedy. Don't go into it thinking that it's going to be like jump scares or it's going to be super gory or anything like that. It's sort of like a lot of the gore in it. So I'm just like warning you ahead of time, because I don't want you to think it's this big bloodbath or anything. Like, fucked up shit does happen, but a lot of the gore is more implied than shown. There is like a little bit of violence and stuff, but it's not a bloodbath by any means. And it's kind of more of a Twilight Zone-y kind of vibe. Now, it does have sort of a twist end, kind of. If you've seen a lot of horror movies, I don't think it'll be too hard to guess where it's going, but I don't really think that diminishes the enjoyment of the movie by any stretch of the imagination. I think the strength of this one is the character work and the interaction between the characters, which is good, because a movie like this that is essentially just like one, I want to say like one location. It's not exactly, but I'll get into that in a minute. But where it's just kind of like a very small scale film where it's just a bunch of people like together in an enclosed space for an extended amount of time, and you really need that cast to fucking nail it, especially with a premise as kind of like strange or like eerie as this one. And I really think that is the main thing that really sells this movie, is the cast of it is just great, and I just love their interactions. They actually really do seem like a horribly bickering family, like go into grandma's house or whatever, and it's so good, like the way that it's put together. So like I said, I really like discovering horror movies like this where the budget of it is obviously really small. I don't even know how much this cost to make, maybe a couple million. It actually ended up, I don't even know if it got a theatrical release in the US. I'm pretty sure it didn't. But I think what ended up happening was that it got really good word of mouth, I guess, when it came out on DVD, and it ended up making like $77 million in DVD sales, which is kind of a big deal for a movie that wasn't really all that. It didn't really seem to have much marketing or anything like that behind it. And like I said, I hadn't heard of it. I didn't hear of it when it came out. It might have gotten a theatrical release, but I don't remember it getting one. If it did, I certainly didn't see it back when it came out in 2003. But this just goes to show that if you have a good script and a good concept, doesn't have to be the most original concept in the world, because this isn't. I've seen some other movies that are kind of similar to this, but that's what concept is original nowadays? It's like you can put original spins on things, but everything's been done at this point. So you can just kind of like put your own kind of style to it, and that's pretty much all you can ask for. And that's what this movie does. But it just goes to show you have a great script, you have great actors, and a cool concept, and it will take you a really long way towards making a really effective, really entertaining horror movie, and this definitely has that in spades. So what the setup of this movie is, basically it starts pretty much just in the middle of things. It almost, and I've seen a couple other reviews say this as well, that it almost kind of seems like a stage play a little bit, and it even kind of like starts in sort of like the middle of a conversation. And I think that kind of adds to, it's a little bit odd in the sense that it's not like a standard low budget American horror movie. You can tell that this wasn't necessarily an American director, because it has a little bit of a different sort of sensibility to it, I guess, even though, as I said, all the actors are American and most of them are people that you will recognize. So the setup of this, there's a family, which consists of the dad, who's played by Ray Wise, and his name is Frank, and his wife, Laura, who's played by Lynn Shaye. Now, they have two older kids. They have a teenage son who looks about 16-ish. His name's Richard, and they have a grown daughter named Marion, who I'm assuming is like in her early 20s, because she says something about she seems like she's in grad school or something like that, so she's probably like in her 20s. She's actually played by Alexandra Holden, who I think was maybe, I kind of want to say she was maybe in one of the American Horror Stories things, but I think she's been in some other movies too, like she was in The Hot Chick and like some other stuff. And then she also, her boyfriend, Brad, who's actually going to propose to her, although she doesn't know that yet, is also along with them. So the three of them are in the back seat, and then, mom and dad are in the front. And they are on their way to Laura's, like the wife's mom's house, like grandma's house, for their traditional Christmas dinner, like Christmas Eve dinner, which they do every year. They even say like later on that they've been doing this for 20 years. So this is assuming this is the 21st year that they're going. Now, for whatever reason, which they get into it a little bit, the dad, Frank, I guess it's like a really long drive, and he's getting kind of sleepy and kind of, dozing off or whatever. And he decides that instead of taking the interstate, as they have done every year for the past 2 decades, he decides, just for a little spice, a little entertainment, like keep himself awake, he says, he's going to take this back way, this shortcut. And, if you've seen any horror movies, you know that taking a shortcut, especially one that's kind of like in the middle of the woods, it's never going to end well. And indeed, this does not end well either. Now, very, very early in the film, ironically, even though Frank has decided, we're going to take this back road, and then pretty much all the other family members have fallen asleep, and then he starts to doze off as well, and he kind of goes into the other lane, and this other car is like coming at them and like honks, and he has to swerve, and the car doesn't wreck. He is actually able to get out of the way, but obviously everybody wakes up. Now, shortly after this, they have passed like this cabin, and then they see this woman in white, and she looks like she's kind of wounded. Like she has kind of like a cut on her forehead, and she looks like she's carrying a baby. So he's looking out there in the woods, and he's like, I could have sworn I saw a woman in white out there. So this has like kind of a folklore-ish, vanishing hitchhiker kind of vibe to it too, which I really thought was a cool addition. Now, so he's like, I just saw her. And they're like, well, we don't see anything. They're looking out there. And then she comes around to the other side of the car. And he's asking her questions like, do you need help? You look like you're hurt or whatever. And he's like, hey, there was a cabin back there. Let's put her in the car and we'll take her back to the cabin and maybe we can, get some help or find somebody there. Or that's where she came from or whatever. So she gets in the car and they start asking her like, hey, where'd you come from? Are you all right? And she really won't answer them. So they just assume that she's been hurt and that she's in shock or whatever. So at this point, they get back to this cabin and they go in there and there's like nothing in there really. There's just like all these animal skulls and shit like that hanging all over the walls. And, you know, obviously there's no phone, there's no people, there's no nothing. And then at this point, what ended up happening was that the daughter, Marion, she actually said, well, I'll get out of the car and I'll just like stay here by the road so the woman can fit in the car because she wouldn't fit in there with all the people in the back seat. So because the cabin was only like a little way away. So she's kind of like just walking around out on the road by herself and the rest of them kind of go back to this cabin. Now, so while Frank and Laura, the mom and dad, are sort of exploring this cabin, looking for somebody or looking for what's going on, and the teenage son, of course, because he's a teenage boy, wanders off in the woods to jerk off, literally. He's brought porn with him. He's like come prepared for this journey, and so he's kind of disappeared, and then so this mystery woman and Brad, Marion's boyfriend, are left in the car. At which point Brad like starts talking to her, and then she kind of talks, like, because he asked her about the baby, and she says, oh, her name is Amy, and then she's like, do you want to hold her? And so he does, but then he's like, yeah, how does your baby breathe with all that blanket over their face? And you know what probably the answer to that one is? So after that, so everybody starts freaking out about that. And then basically she ends up kind of like taking off or like disappearing or whatever. So as the movie goes on, they start driving down this road. And one thing that they notice is that, one, they have yet to pass another car. The only car that they passed was the one that he almost hit, like when he almost fell asleep. So they haven't passed a car since then. They haven't seen any cross streets. They have seen a sign which points to a town called Marcotte, but they have maps, because this is 2003, they didn't have GPS, or it wasn't widespread or whatever. And they have the maps and they're like, yeah, there's no town called that, like around here. So they're trying to like come up with ideas. It's like, why is this road, there's like nobody on it? Why are there no cross streets? Why are there no signs? We should have found something by now. There should have been a gas station. So they're coming up with all these different kind of ideas, where the most plausible one, like Frank comes up with the idea. He's like, oh, well, maybe this is like a military road and it's like around some secret military base and they don't really want people on here. We just got on here by accident. And, so that's why. And then so they try to start to figure out, well, if we stay on this road and if indeed this town called Marcotte is up ahead, because that's all it says is Marcotte with an arrow on it. It doesn't say how far it is or anything. And he's like, well, if we're following this road, which is going to the west, which they figure out, he's like, well, then we should get to the coast at least, like in 50 miles. So it's like, we can't be that lost. However, the road just keeps on going straight, and it doesn't seem like they're getting anywhere. And weirdly enough, they also pass the same sign that says Marcotte. They just like keep passing it. So essentially, they're in this kind of purgatorial loop type of situation where it's they've kind of gone into the Twilight Zone, like you said, because there's no way for them to get off the road. And another thing that's pretty upsetting about this whole situation is that pretty much every time they stop the car, somebody ends up getting killed. So like the first time that they stop, when they go back to the cabin and the woman in white is there, Brad ends up getting killed. And he is essentially, he's pretty much like torn apart, although they don't really show that. They only show like part of it, or it's implied or suggested. I think like his severed ear is shown or something like that. And then later on, like Lynn Shaye draws something that looks like that. So he's like all torn up in pieces. And so the only other car on the road that they see is this black hearse. And so like they don't know where Brad went, like after, and the woman in white disappeared and then Brad disappeared, and then this hearse goes by and then they see Brad in the back like being like, let me out, like out of the back window. And then like later on they find him and he's all fucked up and dead. So pretty much as they go along the road, every now and then they have to stop for whatever reason. Like one time there's a baby carriage in the middle of the road inexplicably, and they stop and then somebody ends up getting killed. And every time this black hearse goes by and the person gets put in the hearse, and then like you find them later on and they're all like fucked up. So that's essentially the entire movie. So honestly, the whole movie, 90%, 95% of the movie takes place inside the car, like while it's moving. And so it's a lot of interactions between the family, and you'd think that would be, I don't know, you'd think that would be boring or it would get annoying, and it totally does not. Just because, as I said earlier, all the actors in this are so good that you really get the sense that this is a real family, and they have all these, simmering resentments against one another, and it's all kind of like coming out as, the situation gets worse and worse. As it goes on, and the family members end up getting killed or dying in horrible ways, and they don't know what's going on. They don't know where they are. They don't understand why they can't get off this road, why it's not going anyplace, why they keep seeing the same sign, why it seems like they're just like circling around, in this hellish sort of situation. So they're just getting like stressed out, and all this stuff starts coming out about, how maybe the teenage son was actually the product of an affair that mom had, and then it turned out the dad was maybe having an affair as well. It turns out that Marion is pregnant, and it's like the son's like using drugs and all this other stuff. So as it's going on, like all of this stuff starts coming out about the family. But as I said, it's almost done like in a black comedy kind of way. And in that vein, I think that like Ray Wise and Lynn Shaye like crush it in this movie. They are so good. And you can tell that, in this movie, it totally seems like they've been married for 20 years and they just like loathe each other. But they don't loathe each other, but it's like there's a lot of resentments that have built up there. And it's like a lot of like passive aggressive kind of comments and stuff that kind of get more and more like overt as shit gets worse and worse. And the thing that happens with one of the family members getting killed, and Laura, the mom, Lynn Shaye, her reaction to it, she basically just wigs the fuck out. She almost kind of like goes into denial, and then she starts doing all this weird shit, like eating an entire pie and like just saying all this crazy shit. And that part of it is just like so good, and it's just so funny, but it's also like kind of horrifying funny. You know what I mean? So it really does a good job of like straddling this line between this like really like black humor and being kind of like, I don't want to say sad, but it's like kind of tragic and horrific at the same time, because it's sort of like there's scenes like that that are just kind of like, I don't necessarily want to say goofy, but are just kind of like that are funny, but like in a blackly comic kind of way, just because the situation is so absurd and bizarre that it's like they don't really know how to react to it. But then there's like when some of the family members get killed, there's actually genuine emotion and like tragedy and stuff like that there. So it's like a really, I think the movie really, kind of tread that balance, that tightrope, like really well, to a sense. I don't know. It's like, it's hard for me to say. I guess you could call it a horror comedy because it is funny, but I don't know. It's also kind of creepy too. There's like a lot of really unsettling, like I said, it's more like an unsettling kind of thing than it's not gory, and it's not, there's not any jump scares really or any kind of like horrific imagery, but just the situation and the way that each of them reacts to it, and the way all of them, in a way, it's kind of like you wish that the family would. I think that's what the tragedy was, because Ryan Hollinger did a really good video about this a couple years back, and he said the tragedy of the movie was that, you would think that a family that was this fragmented, and if they were in a situation like this, it would be better if they would all pull together and try to figure out what was going on and how to get out of the situation. But they don't do that. They pretty much all just react to it in their own ways and become even more fragmented, and it's like really sad. And he was talking about like the ending being really sad too, which actually the way he put it, like when you think about it, it is like pretty fucking sad. Now, I don't necessarily want to spoil the end. As I said, what the description of it that I gave, if you've seen a lot of Twilight Zone type stuff, or you've seen a lot of horror movies like this, you might be able to figure out where it's going. But I will note that stay through, I can't remember how far into the credits it is, but there is like a little bit of a credits sequence. I just watched the shit yesterday, and I feel like the credits started, yeah, and then there's like a scene. So there is like a mid-credit scene or a credit scene in the middle of the credits that introduces ambiguity back into the story, because at the end of the story it sort of like explains what was going on, and you're like, oh, okay, now I get it. But if you watch into the credits, there is like a little short scene in there that, as I said, introduces the ambiguity back into it. I'm not sure if the filmmakers put that in there because they thought that the ending would piss some people off, because they didn't like that explanation, or I'm not really sure why, or if that was their plan all along. I don't know what to tell you. But honestly, I think it's good either way. As I said, it's not the most original twist, if you want to call it that. I have seen other things that have been done like that, but that doesn't matter. It's like, I think that I don't think it's necessarily, it's been done before or anything like that, but I just think like the execution of it is so good and so enjoyable that it doesn't really matter. And I actually kind of like that they put that other scene in there. So it kind of left you guessing. It's like, oh, well, was that really the explanation, or did all that happen the way that you thought that it happened, and all this other kind of stuff? Like I said, I'm trying not to spoil it, because I know a lot of people haven't seen it, even though it came out a long time ago. It came out in 2003. But I do feel like a lot of horror fans haven't seen it, and it's definitely a really, really good Christmas horror film. It's not overtly Christmas, but they are going to Grandma's house for Christmas. The whole back of the car is filled with Christmas presents, and they do actually, when they get stuck along the road, they do actually utilize like some of the stuff that they wrapped to take to Grandma's house. And there's a kind of a funny scene, as I said earlier, with Lynn Shaye and a horrible sounding pie that she made. I think it's pumpkin and chocolate that she's making, which might be good. I don't know. I don't know. They said it, and then like the teenager was like, "Man, that smells like ass," and I was just kind of like, I can't decide if pumpkin chocolate pie would be good or not. Probably not, but I don't know. I don't see how it could be that bad. I don't know. I'm thinking too much about it, probably. But yeah, so it's Christmassy in that sense, and they sing jingle bells and shit like that while they're driving. So, so if you've seen a lot of Christmas horror movies and you like Christmas horror movies and you want to check out one that you maybe haven't seen that's a little bit underrated, a little bit of as I said, one location, pretty much the whole thing takes place inside the car. Obviously they get out of the car sometimes too for various reasons, along this one road, but it pretty much takes place along this one road. The only time that they're not on the road is when they're maybe like a little bit in the woods or at that little weird cabin like a time or two, and that's pretty much it. But as I said, you don't need a big budget, you don't need snazzy special effects, you don't need all that kind of stuff if you have really good actors and a really good concept and a really good script, and this definitely has all three of those things. So please watch it for Christmas. I actually love this movie. I've seen it 3 or 4 times at this point, and I just like it better each time. I love the characters, you know what I mean? Just their bickering is just like so funny to me, and like just the crazy situations that ensue, and like the way that each of them like reacts to the crazy situation is just so good to me. And it's just like, and it's dark, but it's also like really funny, and it's really kind of like my sense of humor. So I really, really dig it. Hopefully you will dig it as well if you haven't seen it. As I said, I believe you can watch it. I think if you have the IMDb add-on for Amazon Prime, I think you can watch it on there, or you can watch it on Tubi for free, or I think maybe you can rent it on YouTube. I'm not really sure, but honestly, I would go to Tubi and watch it, and it's just really, really fun, and I think more people should see it, and it should be up there with kind of like the classic Christmas horror movies, definitely, and probably one that you should put in your rotation every year around the holiday. And that will do it for this Christmas edition of my Flickers of Fear. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.